Janice, I want to thank you for participating on Short the TV interview. I'm a big fan of yours. I know you're a great writer, you're a great editor, and what I realized that you're also entrepreneur in heart. On the same time, you're a teacher in heart. You have a strong academic background, and I feel like it's an honor for me that I got the opportunity to interview you. So I want you to share with our audience. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I went through all of school thinking I would be in theater. That was my degree, my undergraduate degree, my graduate degree was in theater, and then somewhere I took a turn and I started to do editing and writing and discovered that I really liked it a lot and that it was something that I felt that I was good at. And I took a postgraduate work in social psychology, so I learned about organizational behavior and that sort of thing. And then I started a theater company in San Francisco, and I taught acting and other theater subjects, and I also discovered that I like to teach. And not long afterwards, I got actually a job at an instructional technology firm, one of the first really firms, and I learned about instructional design, how to build a training program, all of that sort of thing. Somehow or another, it all came together into what I do, or have done most of my life, which is training and designing programs and helping people communicate clearly, and all of that. And it all seems to work together, and I think that that's one of the things I've learned actually in my life, is that you do a little thing here, you do a little thing here, you do a little thing here, and they seem very disparate. And then one day you realize that they all come together into a skill set that is both satisfying and useful.
I wanted to find out from you that what made you successful?
What made me successful? Hard-headedness. I like to start things. Not quite as good at finishing them. That's something I'm working on. But I really like to start things. I don't really like being in other people's structures. So I've had to learn to go on my own. When the company, instructional design firm I was working for, went under and laid everybody off, another woman and I started a training company, and we knew nothing about how to run a company, run a business, market ourselves, or any of that. So we've had to learn on the fly. And what that involved was trying things out. Oh yes, we can do that. Okay, how are we going to go about doing that? And figuring it out, experimenting, all of that. And over the years we learned, it was just a constant learning process. And training itself is being a professional learner. I mean, you learn something that you don't know how to do, and then you teach other people to do it. So I like that, I think that I like to explore, and I'm willing to take risks, and I'm willing to learn from my mistakes, and I think that helped a lot. Well, we would lose clients because we would do something stupid, and then we'd sit down and we'd think, okay, what happened there? And we would learn from that, when we would learn for the next time.
If you can share some of your failure stories with our audience and how those failures helped you to become successful.
Specific things, it's really easy to forget about them once they've gone through, but I do remember one client who called us in because people weren't communicating with one another. And so, they wanted a communication skills workshop. They wanted to put everybody into a workshop for a day or a half a day, and at the end of it, they would be able to communicate well with one another. Well, we went into their offices and we noticed, but didn't register, that they had, this was a long time ago, they had all the telephones. They were customer service people. They had all the telephones and a divider in the middle of the room, and so people had to use the same telephones. They couldn't communicate well with one another or with the customers because of the physical layout and the resources what they were given. But we sort of didn't connect with that, and we went into the workshop and we gave them the workshop, and nothing changed. And the client was upset. You know, this workshop didn't produce results. And then we thought back what happened, and we thought, you really have to find out everything about the situation, not just what the client tells you. So that was a big learning experience. And it was because the workshop failed, basically. And the other time that stands out for me is I'm not good with politics. We had a client, a government agency, and we were doing supervisory skills training. And we heard something in the class that we thought we needed to check out with the person who had hired us, the human resources person. So we went in and we said, you know, one of the people in the class, you know, told us this and such and such. I don't even remember exactly what it was. And he looked me, it was about something that was going on in the organization. He looked me right in the eye and said, no, that's not happening. And at that moment I realized, oh, I never should have brought that up because I'm stepping on the politics of the organization here. So I learned a lot from that.
Do you have mentors? And if so, can you share with us how your mentors helped you to shape your life?
And I have not had a lot of mentors in my life. Two people stand out. One of them was when I was running a theater company. And this was the person who was in charge of the theater that sponsored the community theater that I was running, or the subgroup that was running a theater within it. And he taught me a lot about how to deal with all of the things around running a theater company. So I still remember him. If without him, I probably would not have been able to do that. But when I started working for this instructional design firm, this is the part that I think is most interesting. The person who hired me hired a lot of other instructional writers at the same time. None of us were instructional writers. We were writers, we were editors, we were creative people, artists in one way or another. He looked for people who had creativity and had some kind of a certain energy that he was looking for. Certain independent-minded people, which created some problems down the line, but and taught us how to write instructional programs, what it was all about, right from the ground up, and taught us to work as a group, taught us to work with the clients, all of the things that then I needed later on when I started my own company. So I would say he was probably the closest thing I've had to a mentor, and he was more of a role model and a teacher, I think.
What is your proudest moment of your life?
Giving birth to my children and raising them to be adults. You can't get any better than that. I mean, everything else pales next to that, to see my kids grown up out in the world doing things and, you know, struggling with their lives just as everybody does, but being able to do that in a pretty positive way, and I feel that I had something to do with it. So that's number one. I guess starting a company and running it for 26 years was a big achievement now that I think back on it. You know, we went through a lot of difficult times there, and we just kept going and kept learning and kept moving on. I don't know that any one moment was the proudest achievement, but those two things I think are, and I think I'm also proud that I was able to switch gears when we closed down the company and I decided I wanted to go back and become a freelance editor and writer again, to be able to switch gears and to do something new. I'm proud of those moments.
I was looking at one of your current projects, Travel on the House. It seems very interesting. I just visited your website. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
My husband and I have been exchanging and renting out our house for years now. We love to travel. We don't have a lot of money. He was a retired university professor. He was still teaching when we started doing this. And we wanted to go places, and we wanted to go places and spend some time there. So the way that we were able to do that is to subsidize our traveling, all of those costs by, you know, either renting out the house or exchanging, so we didn't have all those lodging expenses, or we had something to help pay. Here in New York, our house has been rented for the 2 months that we've been here, and that helps pay for the apartment that we rent here. So then you have your daily living expenses when you live in a place. It's a great way to to do it. So people kept asking me, well, how do you do that? You know, how can you go to Rome for 2 months? How can you go to New York for 2 months? You know, can you go to Paris for a month and Istanbul for a month? And so I just was explaining, and finally I decided to write a book. So I really worked at it, and I got the book basically done. And then I thought, what am I going to do with this book? I didn't really want to hand it over to a publisher who would just want to make a lot of changes and then not market it, and it would sit there. And then my son, who is he has an MBA in marketing, and he does digital, web-based things. He helps people set up their companies, and for the focus on websites, he says, well, why don't you just put it on a website? He says it's just as easy as doing a blog. And so what I've done is I've taken pieces from the book and created articles for the website. So it's more than a blog, it's articles. And this has been one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. I'm learning about Twitter, I'm learning about Facebook, I'm learning about Google Analytics, I'm learning about how you create a website and what it has to be, all of these things. And luckily I have this great teacher, my son, who's willing to help me with this. So Travel in the House right now exists as I'd say a beta website. And it's still in progress. There's still a lot of things to do, but I've had people like you visit it, give me feedback and that sort of thing. I want there to be a community where people share stories and experiences. I want to start a section where people can do guest articles. The point is just to get that information out there in a way that's not tied to one of the for-profit firms like VRBO or Airbnb and that sort of thing, but actually works together with
Is it safe to share houses, exchange houses?
Well, that's one of the very biggest questions that people ask, and I've answered it in a number of ways, but it basically comes down to a couple of things. It comes down to really establishing communication, checking people out, making sure they're who they say they are, listening very, very carefully, doing your research, and establishing trust.
I'm a big fan of these 3 books you have written about training. Tell us a little bit about the central theme of these 3 books related to training.
Well, I think the theme is in the name of the entire series, which you don't see so much except in the marketing materials. It's training basics. And that's exactly what it is. It's training basics. So say a person in an organization, a supervisor or a human resources assistant or an IT person needs to provide training. They get, that project. They're given the project of providing training for somebody. A small business owner who needs to train their staff and that sort of thing. The primary reader is somebody who really doesn't know what training is all about, how to put it together, how to deliver it so that it works. And that's what we tried to do with the books. Very practical. I tend towards practical things. I'm not much of a theory person. Otherwise, I'd probably be a professor, but I'm not. I like to get relevant information out there in a way that people can really use it, and that's what these books are intended to do.
I recently talked to a CIO of United Nations, and I asked her, what's the biggest challenge you are facing right now? And she mentioned one of the biggest challenges, we are not able to find the right people with the right skills to do the job. Why this skill gap problem exists in the first place, and how can we solve it?
Well, I think it's such a complicated issue. It's not one thing, but the things that I see feeding into it are education is not very highly valued in this country compared to other countries. So there are a lot of people who are graduating from school without really usable skills, relevant skills. And college, for a lot of people, has become more of a party place, a place to have a good time, or to focus on one thing. I'm going to get my degree in this and not think about anything else. It's no longer a general education, which really taught you how to learn. When I went to college, I hate to talk about, all of that, but general education taught you how to learn, and you had to take a lot of courses that basically gave you a good foundation, but more than anything, they taught you how to learn. I think that's not necessarily the case so much anymore. And for a lot of people, you know, they just aren't getting what they need. But I think on the other hand, I think the organizations they're looking for this ideal candidate who has this skill and this skill and this skill and this experience, and, you know, and we can put them to work day one doing, you know, what we want them to do. They're, you know, where what they really need to do is to do what my mentor did, the person who hired me at the instructional design firm, to look for people who have certain abilities, and certain kinds of personalities, and are willing, more than anything else, able and willing to learn. So yes, they have to have a certain technical knowledge perhaps, but they also have to have so much more than that. And you can teach people, you can train them, teach them on the job to do a lot of things if they have that basic, I don't know what it is. I think Google looks for it. For example, Google, I don't know, I've never been in one of their interviews, but I understand that what they're doing is they're trying to find out about the person. So they're not as interested in what the person's experience is or education or any of that, except for specific things they have to know. They're not going to hire me to do programming, for example. But they're looking for certain types of people who collaborate, who can be innovative, who can learn, who, you know, all of that sort of thing. And so I think, so you've got, on the one end, you've got people who are not prepared for the real world. And then on the other hand, you have CIOs and hiring people who are looking for some imaginary candidate that doesn't really exist. And then you have the problem, of course, that there are so many people who, everything's moving so fast. So there's so many people who have a lot of experience and a lot of skills, but they need retraining. They need to shift gears. And people aren't given the opportunity to do that. They're not given the encouragement to do that in our society, either by the government or by companies or any of that.
I found out recently that 7,000 student drops out of high school daily. These numbers bothers me when I see that so much money is spent on education system. So how can we improve the U.S. education system? Do you have some solutions?
I don't have solutions, but I have some really strong ideas. There is not a value for education in this country. It's not valued. Teachers are not respected. And until that changes, nothing's going to change. The other thing, and this is very controversial, I'm sure, is we've got to get control of the schools in the hands of the academics and away from the local school boards. Because the way that we have education set up in this country, it means that we have some really wonderful school districts and we have some really terrible school districts. When my kids were in school, I was on a committee they needed to close a school, one school. So I was on a committee to help decide which school would be closed. And the meetings were horrendous to me, of all of the parents and all of the teachers and the administrators were not listened to at all. All the parents wanted was, the school in my town has to remain open. No, the school in my town has to remain open. It had nothing to do with education, but I was really horrified by the fact that these teachers would stand up there and speak, and then they would be shouted down. It was awful. And there have been enough model schools, there have been enough model programs so that people know how children learn. They know how a well-run school works. But nothing's going to change as long as it's a political issue rather than an issue of education. And as long as teachers are not respected and paid, compensated for their work. I mean, good people aren't going to stay in teaching or go into teaching because first of all, there's no money in it. And secondly, people are getting laid off. Third, they have no resources in the classroom. My grandchildren just moved from a big city school to a smaller city school. The big city school was great, the people were great, but they didn't have any resources. The smaller city, the school is great, and they have resources, you know? So the difference is just astounding. And it's because the smaller city is in a university town where people really have a passion for learning, where they respect education, where they want good education. The parents are involved. Unfortunately, in many areas of this country, the parents are involved in a very negative way. You can't teach this, you can't teach this, you can't teach this. They're want textbooks that whitewash history, all of that sort of thing.
I believe what Jack Welch says, a best-run organization is a learning organization, and organization's ability to learn and translate that learning into action is his biggest competitive advantage. How do you describe a learning organization?
In a learning organization, learning is promoted and supported at all levels, starting at the top. If you don't have the support at the top, if the people at the top don't care about learning, don't see it as important, nothing will ever happen. It could happen in little silos throughout the organization, but it's not going to become an organization-wide, and people are going to keep coming up against obstacles. People in the organization are encouraged to experiment and take risks. In too many organizations, if someone takes a risk and they fail, and I'll use the word, they get shot down and they'll never do it again, right? So there's freedom to do that, within certain boundaries, of course, but there is freedom or encouragement to do that. People are given the time and the resources to apply what they learn. So often, and we heard this over and over and over again when we would do a training program, an organization would put a lot of money into bringing us in to do training. They would release people from their day-to-day works, which costs them a lot of money. They'd fly people in, from other places, put them up to do this training program. And then 3 months later, when we tried to follow up, people were saying, yeah, it's really good information, but I can't do it. I don't have time to do it. Not only don't I have time, but I tried to do it this way, and my supervisor or my manager said, no, don't do it that way. That's not how we do it here. And so, in a learning organization, when somebody learns something, it's expected that they will have the space and the opportunity and the encouragement to apply it, to use it. They might discard it. It might turn out not to be relevant, but they have to have that. And a learning organization is a place in which there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of innovation. And people are not afraid of change. In fact, they welcome change as an opportunity.
Why is it important to build a learning organization?
It's just like lifelong learning is important, because without it, you sort of curl up and stop. Same thing with an organization. If you're not a learning organization, if you don't continue to learn and innovate, you stop. And that might be fine. You might stop at a place where you're very successful, but next year you're not going to be successful. You can't continue doing the same thing over and over again and be successful, because everything's changing. And today, more than ever, everything is changing, everything's moving fast. Everything is competition. And so for any organization, whether it's a big corporation, whether it sells products, whether it's a hospital, any of these things, you have to keep moving forward. You have to keep changing. And I think change is the one constant. That's people want to hold things to where they are, but it's change. That's the one thing you can count on, that things, whatever it is today, it's going to change tomorrow.
I'm finding out all learning organizations spend somewhere between $1,400 to $2,000 per employee on learning and development. We worked with Google, we worked with Amazon, and I see some of them spending $2,000 to as high as $5,000 per year on employee training. So they're spending the money in the training program, but it's not effective.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of the training that is, that people have to take is not relevant. It's either literally not relevant, or they do not see the relevance. They don't understand how it applies to their job, how it's going to help them, what the benefits of the training are. And I think if somebody doesn't see what the benefits are to them, then they're not going to learn. They'll sit there, their bodies will be in the class, but they're not going to learn. I think a lot of the training we see is flavor of the month. Oh, let's teach everybody to thus and so. Well, that's not training. That's 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 training. but nobody's thought about how they're going to use it, why they're going to learn it, any of those things. But they get training and development departments within organizations are known for doing this, partly because one of the things they're doing is they are making themselves useful, valuable, so that they don't get cut. The other thing is flavor of the month in terms of the type of training. Okay, we're going to do all workshops, we're going to do all e-training, we're going to do all this interactive web-based training, we're going to send everybody off for a 3-day retreat, all of these things that people will say, oh, let's do that, that sounds great. But again, they haven't really put it into an overall plan. And that's the other thing, is the organization doesn't have an overall plan for its training and education and organizational development functions. This is what we're doing, this is where we want to be, this is, it's like designing a training program. You have to start with the result in mind, where you want to be at the end of it, and then build out from there. So there's no coordination.
Can you tell me how define training versus learning, and what are the differences?
Yeah, training is learning, but not all learning is training. So it seems to me that training focuses on a specific skill or set of skills that can be applied right away, that have an application. You have to learn how to do this because you need to be able to do this. So you need to be able to communicate clearly with customers on the phone so that you can carry out your job, which is helping customers solve problems, that sort of thing. You need to be able to use this software so you can do your job, which requires using the software. Learning it's an ongoing process. It's exploring, it's experimenting, discovering, changing. It's putting together all of the different things. So you might have training which teaches you a specific skill or set of skills, but learning should be happening all the time. So, for example, you say a manager should be able to organize a learning program and run a learning program. A manager should also be a coach and a mentor so that you can learn from that person. I had this problem with such and such. I'm not quite sure what to do with this, and some ideas, and or I would like to become I want to be promoted. I want to become a manager. What do I do? How do I learn how to do that? It's an ongoing, it's a broader thing. Learning is the whole thing. Training is a very focused part of it. I've seen the name training and development. I've seen learning organization, corporate university, all of these things change over the years. But in the end, what these organizations should be, this part of an organization, I think should be looking at learning as essential to everybody, and the opportunities to learn something another person's job, to learn another person's job over time, to try something out to see whether or not you're good at it or like to do it, all of those sorts of things, without a specific, you have to be able to do this by next Wednesday, type of thing.
Why reading is important, and how can we change the culture? How can we encourage people to read?
It's getting harder and harder and harder to do that because the kids in school are reading less than they did when I was in school. And now they have computer screens to read and that sort of thing, but they're not reading. A lot of the textbooks in schools these days are not readable. They're just collections of facts to memorize and feedback, and then you forget them. They're not making connections between things. As a matter of fact, in many school districts, they're cutting out those connections. They don't want people to see those connections. People don't like them. They're uncomfortable. Kids don't have the encouragement to read. Many of their parents these days don't read very much. They're sitting in front of their computers all day. They're not reading. But there's also something very interesting. I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. The girl was born first. My husband and I are avid readers. I used to read under the covers when I was a kid, at night when I was supposed to be going to sleep. So I started reading really, really early. Our daughter has always been a reader like that. She reads constantly. She's always read constantly since she was a little girl. Our son was pulling teeth to get him to pick up a book. Now that he's an adult and out in the world, I've noticed that he's starting to read. But he doesn't read the way she does. I mean, she devours books, but he'll read a book at a time, and he is reading. He read, of course, a lot of business books. To get an MBA in marketing, you have to, read a lot. So he knows how to do that. He knows how to learn from his reading. But to read for pleasure, I think, is fairly new for him. My grandchildren, also a boy and a girl. The boy is oldest and the girl is second. The boy is very into computers, and he would play Minecraft 24 hours a day if he were allowed to do that. He'll read occasionally, he'll read a book, but he's not nearly as interested. Rose will go to the library and take out, in their town, kids can take out as many books as they want. She'll take out 15 books, and she'll have read them all within a week. So part of it is the person, but certainly the educational system and the technology have discouraged reading now. So schools and parents really have to promote it. Parents have to read to their children. I think that's where it starts. You have to read to the kids.